he said. I'm blocking you for a week so you value me. I said, make it a month. The message blinked on my screen at 11:47 p.m., blue light cutting through the dark of our bedroom. He stood at the foot of the bed while typing it, dramatic even in silence, like he wanted the performance to linger. When the whoosh of the sent message echoed, he looked at me as if he'd just taught me a lesson. A week of silence. A punishment. Because I had questioned him about the late nights, the perfume that wasn't mine, the way he'd started locking his phone. You'll realize what you're losing, he said, already reaching for his jacket. What I realized instead was this. Love doesn't threaten absence to prove presence. The door shut. The apartment felt suddenly larger, quieter. On the kitchen counter, his half-empty coffee mug sat beside unpaid bills, mine to handle as always. My chest hurt, but not from heartbreak. From clarity. If he wanted me to learn my value without him, I would. I met him 3 years ago when I still mistook intensity for devotion. He liked to say he chose strong women, but what he really meant was women who could carry weight without complaining. I had a stable job, good credit, a quiet discipline about my life. He had ambition, charm, and a talent for turning his shortcomings into my responsibilities. In the beginning, his possessiveness felt like protection. I just don't want to lose you, he'd whisper, as if love were something that could be misplaced like keys. Slowly, that whisper turned into rules, who I texted, how long I stayed out, why I needed alone time. If I protested, he'd pull away just enough to make me anxious. Silence was his favorite weapon. He underestimated me in small, precise ways. He'd forget to pay his half of the rent and laugh it off. He'd borrow my car and return it empty. He'd call my emotional boundaries dramatic. And every time I adjusted, compensated, absorbed. I told myself relationships required flexibility. What I didn't admit was that I was the only one bending. So when he threatened to block me to teach me value, it wasn't new behavior. It was just the first time I didn't flinch. The blocking threat wasn't dramatic. That was the problem. It was casual, like commenting on the weather. He'd done smaller versions of it before. Once, during dinner with his friends, he laughed when I corrected a story he told about how we met. Babe, you remember everything wrong, he said lightly, squeezing my knee under the table hard enough to warn me. His friends smiled. I smiled too. Later, he accused me of embarrassing him. Another time, he disappeared for an entire weekend. No explanation. When he returned Sunday night, he tossed his keys into the bowl and said, "You worry too much. It's not attractive." The word unattractive lingered in the air like smoke. He began grating me in subtle ways. If I didn't answer fast enough. See? This is why I need space. If I asked about a strange name lighting up his phone, a long pause, a tired sigh, as if my intuition were exhausting him. Each slight was small enough to deny. Small enough to make me question myself. But they accumulated. Like dust in corners you stop noticing, until one day you see the room clearly and realize you've been living in neglect. The turning point wasn't loud. It arrived in the quiet after he left. The next morning, I woke up to silence. No good morning text, no passive-aggressive meme, no invisible pressure to respond correctly. Just stillness. I made coffee and sat at the kitchen table, staring at the indentation his laptop had left on the wood. 3 years of adjusting myself to fit around him, and he thought a week without me would make me panic. Instead, I felt something unfamiliar. Relief. I opened our shared banking app. My account funded most of our life. My name was on the lease. The internet bill. The insurance. Even the couch he liked to claim as his had been purchased on my card. He had always framed himself as the one with options. The one who could walk away. But standing in that quiet apartment, sunlight cutting across the floor, I saw the math clearly. He wasn't threatening absence because he was strong. He was testing whether I'd chase. That was the moment it clicked, not emotionally but practically. If he wanted space to prove my value, I would give him a version of space he couldn't manipulate. Not loud. Not dramatic. Just permanent. I didn't cry. I made a list. First, the lease. Only my name. I reread the agreement twice, highlighting the clause about occupants. Legally, he was a guest. A long-term one, but still a guest. Second, the utilities. All under my account. Passwords changed in under 5 minutes. Third, the finances. I transferred my savings into a separate account he didn't know existed, an old habit from watching my mother rebuild after my father's debts. Independence isn't dramatic. It's paperwork. By noon, I had reserved a climate-controlled storage unit 10 minutes away. Month-to-month contract. Paid in full for 3 months. Enough time to make a point, not a scene. I scheduled movers for Thursday, 2 days before his lesson week would end. I took Friday off work. Not to grieve. To organize. I folded his clothes carefully. Boxed his shoes in pairs. Wrapped his gaming console in bubble wrap. Nothing broken. Nothing damaged. I wasn't angry enough to be reckless. I was clear enough to be precise. This wasn't revenge fueled by emotion. It was correction fueled by reality. He wanted distance to measure my worth. I decided to measure his place in my life instead. The movers arrived at 9 sharp on Thursday. 2 men in navy uniforms, polite and efficient. I let them in and stepped aside as they assessed the apartment, not as a battlefield but as a checklist. His side of the closet emptied first. Hangers slid along the metal rod with a soft metallic whisper. The dresser drawers opened and closed with dull thuds. I stood by the window, arms folded, watching dust gather where his shoes used to line the wall. It was strangely peaceful. By noon, his presence had been reduced to labeled boxes stacked neatly by the door. Clothes. Electronics. Miscellaneous. 3 years condensed into cardboard and tape. At the storage unit, I entered the code and waited for the metal door to roll up. The space was clean, echoing, temporary. The men placed everything inside exactly as I instructed. Nothing thrown. Nothing shoved. When they left, I stood there a moment longer, memorizing the stillness. 7 days later, my phone buzzed. Miss me. I didn't hesitate. I sent the unit address and access code. No explanation. No emotion. Then I blocked him. Not for a week. Forever. He called from 3 different numbers before he understood the silence wasn't technical, it was intentional. The first voicemail was confused. The second, indignant. By the third, his voice had sharpened into disbelief. You're overreacting, he said, as if relocation were an emotional outburst. Our mutual friends reached out carefully. Not accusatory, curious. What happened? Are you guys okay? I kept my answers simple. We wanted different things. It was true. He wanted leverage. I wanted peace. One friend admitted, quietly, that he'd joked about blocking me before. That he'd called it relationship strategy. Hearing that didn't sting. It clarified. His reputation didn't collapse. Life isn't that cinematic. But it shifted. People began noticing patterns. The subtle put-downs, the need to dominate conversations, the way every conflict made him the victim. Without me buffering his edges, he felt sharper. As for me, the apartment felt lighter. I slept through the night for the first time in months. No anxiety about tone. No rehearsing arguments in my head. The stakes were never about furniture. They were about self-worth. And if you've ever been slowly trained to doubt your own value, you understand why quiet exits matter. In the weeks that followed, nothing dramatic happened, and that was the gift. I rearranged the living room. Not because I had to, but because I could. The couch moved closer to the window. The heavy curtains he liked stayed open. Light filled corners that had felt dim for years. I didn't replace him. I replaced the version of myself that kept negotiating for basic respect. Therapy helped. So did silence. I began noticing how often I had apologized for having needs. How easily I had confused endurance with loyalty. Strength, I learned, isn't how much you can carry. It's knowing when to set something down. He sent one last message through a mutual friend, something about pride, about how I could have handled it better. I didn't respond. Closure doesn't require a final speech. What happens next is simple. I keep my accounts separate. I read contracts carefully. I listen when behavior repeats. And if someone ever threatens absence to measure my love, I won't negotiate. I'll hold the door open. Because the most powerful revenge isn't destruction. It's the quiet decision never to accept less than you deserve again.